Hi everyone. For this research, I wanted to study the extent to which Baltic Russians identify with their nations of residence in light of Russia's compatriot policy. So today, about 1 million ethnic Russians are still living in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, most of whom moved there during the Soviet occupation when these countries were part of the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, they were left to be a new minority group in 3 brand new countries. So they did face some discrimination during the post-Soviet transition. They weren't granted citizenship automatically in Estonia and Latvia, but they were later offered paths to citizenship in accordance with some pressure from the EU during Baltic accession in the early 2000s. And since then, they've been more on a course of integration into these societies. At the same time, Russia is continuing to encourage kinship with its compatriots abroad. And it really tries to exert its influence by accusing Baltics of human rights violations, and it maintains a large Russian media presence in the Baltics, which is important because Russia has used co-optation of Russian minorities abroad to justify aggressive acts in Georgia and Ukraine, and it could potentially claim, the authority to do this anywhere it sees fit in the post-Soviet world. So it's important to see how welcoming minority populations would be to such actions. And I have a graphic there that shows Baltic Russians. Is the higher the share of Baltic Russians in the administrative division. The size of the circle represents the overall population in that area. So about a quarter of Latvia and Estonia's populations are Russian, and it's about 5% in Lithuania. So there's been an in the 90s, but there hasn't been since 2013. So I wanted to sort of fill that gap with this study to see how the Ukrainian invasion and the stronger Russian time also may have influenced Baltic Russian. So many studies in the past have looked at policy developments and how those would affect integration in the long. I actually followed up on those predictions to see how the Baltic Russians are assimilating smoothly. The third is that integration is succeeding to different extents based on which of the 3 Baltic countries is examined. And the fourth is that integration succeeds to different extents across societal factors, such as political participation, socioeconomic status, and things like that. So in reviewing the literature, I developed the thesis that Baltic Russians are generally identifying with their home societies, and although Russian cultural and linguistic identities may persist, they're not strong enough to preserve sort of Russian political influence in the to study this, I used survey data from 4 recent Baltic Russian sociological surveys. The Estonian and Latvian data is less than 5 years old. Unfortunately, the newest Lithuanian data I could find was from, so that's what I used. And I synthesized these data together from the studies to reveal the levels of identification with representation. You can see my findings in the table on the right. The table is basically showing the area of society based on these quantitative. You see that high areas of integration are generally national identity, titular lingual relations, while they were all lagging behind in both political and cultural identity in terms of integrating there. And you can see that Estonia and Lithuania are pretty on par with each other, but Latvia is lagging behind in a few areas. So I basically found that Baltic integration has largely resulted in strong national identities among Baltic Russians, but Russia continues to dominate their cultural identities, and a consolidated political identity to any country is lacking. So that's important to note because it could give Russia an opportunity to threaten integration at some point. And the implications for this research are that there are still pockets of support for Russian intervention in the Baltics, which could be exploited under the right conditions in the countries. So, for example, in Latvia, 40% of respondents said that they supported Russia's actions to intervene on its compatriots' behalf in foreign countries. But at the same time, less than a quarter of those respondents said that they supported Russia's actions in invading Ukraine. So it kind of remains to be seen whether they actually support such military actions or if they just like the idea of it. To sort of combat any potential for this sort of fifth column aspect, the Baltics should ensure that Baltic Russians are receiving more political representation than they currently are. Since they don't have a consolidated political identity, that's really an opportunity for Russia to come in as a foreign actor there. And while Russia's compatriot policy is likely unsuccessful, it must be monitored. It's highly unlikely that Russia would invade, NATO members militarily, but we know that Russia uses hybrid tactics to infiltrate post-Soviet nations and sort of maintain a hand in their affairs. So it's important to monitor the kind of that we just saw in Ukraine, for example, so that we can examine other types of Russian influence in post-Soviet space.